There comes a moment in every life when noise loses its power. A moment when arguing becomes too cheap, when explaining becomes too heavy, when defending yourself becomes too draining, and you discover a weapon that doesn't shout, doesn't tremble, doesn't sweat, yet strikes with a force that shakes the ground beneath those who tried to bury you. That weapon is silence, not the silence of defeat, not the silence of fear, but the silence of someone who has finally realized, I don't need to prove myself to anyone who has already decided not to see me. Silence is not weakness. It is authority wrapped in stillness. It is the echo of confidence that no one can counterfeit. Some people want your reaction because your reaction feeds their sense of control. They tug at your emotions because your voice keeps their games alive. They misjudge your quiet as surrender because they cannot imagine strength that does not roar. But when you go silent, truly silent, something inside them panics because the stage they built for conflict suddenly collapses without your voice holding it up. Your silence hurts them most because it starves the drama they created. It interrupts the cycle they counted on. It breaks the pattern of you always explaining, always rescuing, always softening the blow of their own immaturity. They wanted your energy, not your growth. They wanted your attention, not your peace. And the moment you stop feeding them, they discover how empty they were without you. There are people who studied your triggers like a map. They memorized what words to use to shake you, what accusations to throw to pull you back into old battles. They tested your patience like it was their personal experiment. They assumed you would always react because you always cared. But you reached a turning point where you said, my peace is too expensive to spend on people who treat it like spare change. And when you stopped responding, they finally saw the truth. Your presence was the gift, and your silence is the invoice. Sometimes God will pull you into silence not to punish you, but to protect you. Because if you said what you feel, if you expressed what you know, if you confronted what they did, the fallout would be too great. So he hides you in quietness the way a sculptor covers a masterpiece before unveiling it. Your silence isn't the end of your story, it's the preparation room of your transformation. And when people can't track you, they can't trap you. There is a power in silence that rattles the insecure. You're no longer playing the part they assigned you. You're no longer dancing to the rhythm of their dysfunction. You're no longer bending just to keep the peace. You have become untouchable because you have chosen to stop participating in their chaos. And when chaotic people lose the audience they were performing for, they crumble under the weight of their own noise. Silence is a mirror. When you hold it up, people finally see themselves without your words to blur the reflection. That's why it hurts them. They thought you were the problem. They blamed you for storms they created. They pointed fingers to avoid facing their own shadows. But when you stepped back and your voice disappeared, their excuses disappeared with it. Your silence forced them to wrestle with their own truth, and truth is a painful opponent. You are not silent because you are empty. You are silent because you are full of strength, full of clarity, full of self-respect. You've outgrown the battlefield, and silence is your announcement that you refuse to shrink just to fit in old wars. Let them talk. Let them guess. Let them wonder. Let them feel the weight of your absence the way they once took your presence for granted. You owe no explanation for your evolution. Your silence has already spoken. When you finally understand that not every battle deserves your breath, something inside you begins to shift. You stop rushing to defend yourself against people who already made up their minds. You stop pouring explanations into cups that have no bottom. You stop allowing your peace to be dragged into every storm someone else stirs up. There is a point in maturity where you recognize that your voice is precious, and you will not waste it on ears that refuse to hear or hearts that refuse to understand. Silence becomes your sanctuary, your shield, your quiet declaration that you are no longer available for dysfunction dressed as conversation. And in that stillness, an unusual strength rises inside you, a strength that does not shout, yet carries the weight of 1,000 words. Your silence hurts them most because it dismantles the power they thought they had over you. There are people who survive off your reaction like parasites, feeding on the energy you didn't know you were giving away. As long as you responded, they felt validated. As long as you engaged, they felt in control. As long as you explained, they felt superior. But the moment you went quiet, the ground beneath them trembled. They depended on your emotion to keep their ego inflated, and when the supply stopped, they were left with the hollowness they had been avoiding. Your silence forced them to face the emptiness within themselves, and that confrontation stung more deeply than any words you could have thrown. When you step back and disengage, you break the rhythm of conflict they were counting on. You stop being their emotional punching bag, their sounding board, their psychological playground. Suddenly, the script they rehearsed no longer works because you're no longer reading your lines. You've walked off the stage they built to trap you in cycles of confusion and guilt. And without your participation, their performance collapses. They cannot keep the drama alive alone, and the silence exposes how much they depended on you to sustain their chaos. It is a painful revelation for them, because your absence shines a bright light on their dysfunction. It shows them that the power they claimed was never theirs. It was borrowed from the attention you gave them. Silence also marks a transition within you, a rising, a turning, a recalibration of priorities. You begin to realize that peace is not passive, it is powerful. It is a boundary drawn without lifting your voice. It is a declaration that you refuse to be dragged into battles that cost you your joy. It is the realization that not everything deserves an answer, not everyone deserves access, and not every situation requires your presence. Silence becomes the language of your growth, the soundtrack of your healing, the environment where your soul begins to breathe again. And while the world may mistake it for withdrawal, it is actually you reclaiming the parts of yourself you gave away too freely. Some people panic when you go silent because your silence reveals what your words once disguised. Your quiet exposes their guilt, their manipulation, their insecurity. It presses on the sore spots they spent years covering with noise. They can ignore your arguments, but they cannot ignore your absence. They can dismiss your feelings, but they cannot dismiss the void left behind when your energy is no longer available to them. Silence is a mirror they cannot escape, and when they are forced to look into it, they see the parts of themselves they tried to hide behind your reactions. That is why it cuts so deep, why it hurts so sharply, why it shakes them so violently. Your silence becomes the truth they can no longer outrun. There comes a season when you realize that silence is not just the absence of words, but the presence of wisdom. You stop trying to correct people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop offering explanations to those who twist your truth into shapes that benefit their insecurities. You stop trying to rewrite the script in the minds of those who have already decided who they want you to be. And as you withdraw from the noise, something remarkable begins to unfold. Clarity rises like morning light, breaking through a fog you didn't know you were walking in. The silence that once felt uncomfortable becomes a healing atmosphere where you finally hear your own thoughts without interruption. You discover how much of your voice had been swallowed by the need to please, to defend, to justify. And once you taste the freedom of that quiet, you begin to guard it like treasure. Your silence hurts them most because it removes their leverage. People who rely on manipulation crumble when their target becomes unresponsive. They need your reaction to keep their tactics alive. They rely on your emotions to pull you back into the maze they designed. Without your voice, their strategies fall apart. Without your participation, their control evaporates. They poke, they provoke, they pressure. Buttons that once triggered fireworks, but now nothing moves, and that stillness terrifies them because it signals that you have outgrown their influence. It announces that the emotional power they wielded over you has been dismantled. The silence you wear becomes armor, and they can feel the shift even if they cannot explain it. When you go silent, you reclaim space in your own mind. You begin to untangle the knots that conflict tied inside you. You hear the truth of your own heart more clearly, and you recognize the places where you allowed others to speak louder than your own intuition. Silence lets you step outside the whirlwind long enough to see who was helping you spin and who was trying to keep you dizzy. And as you regain your balance, you start recognizing old patterns you refused to acknowledge. The people who always needed you in chaos suddenly lose access to the version of you that once fed their instability. They are left wrestling with a reality they cannot control. You are changing, and their old methods no longer work. Silence exposes motives in ways words never could. The people who genuinely value you will respect your quiet. They will understand your distance. They will give you space without demanding explanations. But the ones who are using you, draining you, or manipulating you will panic at your absence. They will push harder, guilt trip deeper, dramatize louder, because they sense that their grip on you is slipping. Silence reveals who is connected to your spirit and who is addicted to your energy. It unmasks intentions and reveals alliances. You learn more about a person in your silence than you ever did in your conversations. In that silence, you also grow stronger spiritually and emotionally. You begin to trust that you do not need to fight every battle to win the war. You start to understand that peace is not found in proving your point, but in protecting your spirit. You learn that silence does not mean weakness, it means discipline. It means you are no longer available to people who drain you. It means you are choosing your battles with intention rather than impulse. And as you settle into that discipline, your confidence becomes rooted in something deeper than approval. Your worth is no longer tied to how loudly you can defend yourself, but to how peacefully you can walk away. Your silence becomes the announcement of your growth, the quiet thunder that signals a shift within you. You stop engaging in conversations that only lead to more confusion. You stop revisiting wounds that need time, not debate, to heal. You stop arguing with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. And as you distance yourself from noise, the people who once depended on your reaction are left to face the silence they never expected. There comes a moment when your silence becomes a turning point, not just in your relationships, but in your identity. You begin to recognize that speaking has often been your way of carrying burdens that were never yours to lift. You explained because you cared. You defended because you valued connection. You reacted because your heart was open and honest. But then experience taught you that not everyone deserves that level of access. Not everyone can handle the sincerity you offer. Not everyone is ready for the depth you live in. So you learn to retreat into silence, not as an escape, but as a recalibration of your soul, a place where you no longer waste your strength on people who only came to take, never to understand. Your silence hurts them most because it shatters the illusion that they had influence over your emotions. They were accustomed to pulling on your empathy like a rope, expecting you to follow their tug every time. They believed that your heart was a switch they could flip on or off with their behavior. They took comfort in knowing that they could summon your reaction whenever it benefited them. But when you stopped responding, when you withdrew your emotional presence, they discovered that the power they thought they held was imaginary. Your silence exposed the truth that your compassion was a choice, not a leash they could yank. And the moment that choice was withdrawn, they felt the weight of losing something they never respected. Silence is not a retreat, it is a revelation. It reveals what words hid. It reveals what intentions tried to disguise. When you stop speaking, you stop cushioning the truth. Your quiet unwraps realities people were not prepared to face. They believed the noise of arguments kept things alive, but they never realized it was your willingness to engage that gave the situation life. Without your participation, the dynamic collapses. Without your voice, their narrative falls flat. Silence forces every character in the story to confront their own script. And for many, that confrontation is more painful than anything you could have ever said. But silence also elevates you internally. It becomes the place where your spirit gathers strength, where your clarity becomes sharper, where your emotions settle like dust in a room finally undisturbed. You begin to notice how much noise you used to absorb, how often you let others dictate your mood, how frequently you allowed yourself to be pulled into conflicts because your heart wanted to fix what your peace wanted to flee. In silence, you rediscover yourself. You regain the pieces you gave away out of fear of disappointing others. Your silence becomes a sanctuary where you reclaim your identity without interference. And while you're growing, they're unraveling. Because they cannot understand a version of you that no longer needs their validation. They cannot negotiate with someone who isn't arguing. They cannot manipulate someone who isn't engaging. They cannot guilt someone who has learned that distance is not disrespect. It is self-respect. The silence that protects you becomes the silence that exposes them. Their attempts to provoke you fall into emptiness. Their strategies dissolve. Their grip weakens, and they are left to face their own reflection without you standing in the way. Silence teaches you that not everything deserves your voice. It teaches you that wisdom often whispers when pride wants to shout. It teaches you that some battles are won by stepping aside, not stepping forward. It teaches you that peace is a power that doesn't need to announce itself. And as you grow more comfortable in that quiet, you begin to see that your silence is not the absence of power. It is the overflow of it. It is the moment when you realize that you do not owe anyone a performance, a reaction, or a justification. Your silence becomes your boundary, your shield, your transformation. And in that transformation, those who once underestimated you finally understand the truth they were never ready to hear.